The observation deck hummed with nervous energy as dozens of alien scientists clustered around holographic displays. Their attention focused on a single structure floating in the void, the Kestaruk Gauntlet, an ancient facility that had claimed countless lives across 10,000 years. "This is madness," chittered Physician Krell, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. The insectoid researcher gestured at the massive installation with one of his 6 limbs. 47 species have attempted entry. 0 survivors. What makes this human think she can succeed? Sarah Chin stood apart from the crowd, running final checks on her environmental suit. The slender woman appeared unremarkable by human standards, standing at average height with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. But to the assembled scientists she represented something terrifying, a creature from a Class 12 death world. "Because someone has to try," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying across the deck. "You've spent 3 decades studying this thing from the outside. I can get you data from the inside." The research director, a towering being named Administrator Quinn, rippled his gelatinous form in distress. His species communicated partially through color changes, and right now he flashed deep purple, the shade of extreme concern. "Dr. Chin, I must protest again. The gauntlet was designed by the architects, a civilization we know almost nothing about. What we do know suggests they built this as the ultimate test of biological resilience. The first chamber alone generates gravitational forces that would crush most species instantly." Sarah smiled, though the expression seemed to unsettle several nearby researchers. Humans baring their teeth remained an unsettling gesture to many species, even when meant friendly. "I've reviewed all the data," she said. "Every expedition log, every scan, every sensor reading from the past 30 years. I know what I'm walking into." "Knowing and surviving are different things," said Dr. Plix, a small amphibious being whose skin glistened under the station lights. "The Yathan Empire sent their finest warriors. They were a species that evolved on a high-gravity world. All 12 died in the first chamber within minutes. The Yorthans evolved on a planet with gravity only 30% higher than their standard," Sarah pointed out. "Earth's gravity is already stronger than galactic average. My bones are denser. My heart is more powerful. My muscles work differently." This statement caused a ripple of movement through the assembled scientists. It was true that Earth was classified as a death world, but most of them had assumed this was due to the planet's weather patterns or perhaps its microbial life. The idea that baseline gravity itself was a challenge had not occurred to many of them. Administrator Quinn shifted colors again, this time to a pale yellow that indicated curiosity mixed with fear. "Even if you survive the gravity chamber, there are at least 15 other zones we've identified from external scans. Temperature extremes that flash freeze and then boil. Radiation that breaks down DNA. Toxins that attack cellular structures. Pathogens that have killed everything they've touched. The sensory deprivation chamber that drove the Kelthian hive mind insane. And that's just what we can detect from outside." Sarah picked up her helmet and tucked it under one arm. "Then I guess we're about to learn something new." The transport shuttle felt cramped with Sarah and 3 observers crammed inside. The observers were there purely to monitor, sealed in their own protective pods. Sarah sat alone in the deployment section, breathing slowly and steadily. Krell's voice crackled over the communication system. "We're approaching the entrance now. Are you certain you want to proceed?" "I'm certain," Sarah replied. Through the viewport, the gauntlet loomed larger. It was shaped like a massive cylinder, perhaps 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer in diameter. Its surface was smooth and dark, decorated with symbols that no linguist had successfully translated. A single opening gaped at one end, large enough to admit a small ship. "The entrance will only accept biological matter," explained Dr. Plix over the comm. "Any technology beyond basic environmental suits gets rejected. We lost 6 drones that way before we figured it out. You'll have your suit and the communication implant we installed. That's all." "I understand," Sarah said. The shuttle settled onto the small landing platform that extended from the entrance. Sarah stood and made her way to the airlock. Her suit was lightweight by human standards but represented the absolute limit of what the gauntlet would tolerate. It would provide basic atmospheric protection and temperature regulation, but nothing more. "Atmospheric scan shows breathable air inside," reported one of the technicians. "But that doesn't mean it's safe. The architects might have added something our sensors can't detect." Sarah cycled through the airlock and stepped onto the platform. The entrance before her was a circular portal perhaps 10 meters across. Beyond it, darkness waited. "Vital signs look stable," Krell observed. Heart rate elevated but within expected parameters for human stress response. "I'm fine," Sarah said. "Just eager to get started." She walked toward the entrance. As she crossed the threshold, lights flickered to life inside. They were soft and blue, illuminating a corridor that stretched ahead into the distance. The walls were perfectly smooth and covered in more of those strange symbols. "I'm inside," Sarah reported. "The corridor extends at least 50 meters ahead before it opens into a larger chamber. I can see what looks like the gravity zone you mentioned." "Please proceed with extreme caution," Administrator Quinn urged. "We're recording everything through your suit sensors and your implant. Even if something happens, the data will help future attempts." Sarah didn't respond to that. She simply walked forward, her boots making soft sounds against the floor. The material felt solid but slightly warm, as if the station itself were alive. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was circular, perhaps 100 meters across, with a high ceiling that disappeared into shadow. In the center of the room stood a pillar with a glowing crystal at its top. The path to the crystal was clear, but Sarah could see the air itself shimmer and distort, a visible sign of the gravitational forces at work. "I'm at the first challenge," Sarah said. "Preparing to enter the gravity field." "Wait." Krell's voice was urgent. "We're detecting power levels far higher than anticipated. The gravitational force in that room could be 8 times galactic standard. Maybe more. Your body will weigh over half a ton." Sarah stretched her arms and rolled her shoulders. "Earth's gravity is already higher than your standard. I've trained in enhanced gravity. I can handle this." "Dr. Chin, please reconsider," pleaded Administrator Quinn. "We can gather more data. Send better equipment. There's no need to risk your life." Sarah looked back at the entrance, knowing that dozens of scientists were watching through her suit cameras. She thought about all the species that had tried and failed. She thought about the mysteries locked inside this ancient facility. And she thought about what it meant to be human, to come from a world that tried to kill you every single day. "There's every need," she said quietly. "Because if we don't take risks, we never learn anything new." Then Sarah Chin stepped into the gravity field and the real test began. The moment Sarah crossed into the gravity field, her knees buckled. The force hit her like a physical wall, pressing down on every part of her body. Her suit registered the change immediately, and alarms blared in her ear. "Gravitational force is 9 times galactic standard." Krell's voice was panicked. "Dr. Chin, retreat immediately. Your spine will compress. Your organs will fail." Sarah didn't retreat. She dropped to one knee, breathing hard, letting her body adjust. Every movement felt like pushing through thick mud. Her heart pounded in her chest, working overtime to pump blood against the crushing pressure. "Sarah, please," Administrator Quinn begged. "The Yethan warriors died within 2 minutes at this level. You must turn back." "Not yet," Sarah grunted. She placed both hands on the floor and pushed herself upright. Her legs shook with effort, muscles screaming in protest. But they held. Back on the observation deck, dozens of scientists stared at their displays in stunned silence. Dr. Plix's mouth hung open, her amphibious features frozen in shock. "This is impossible," she whispered. Her skeletal system should be fracturing. Her cardiovascular system should be failing. But Sarah was moving. Slowly, painfully, but moving. She took one step forward, then another. Each step was a battle against the invisible force trying to crush her into the floor. "Her bone density," Krell muttered, scanning the data streaming from Sarah's suit. "It's nearly twice what we estimated. And her muscle composition, the way her heart is built, it's all designed for exactly this kind of stress." Sarah focused on her breathing. In through the nose, slow and controlled. Out through the mouth, steady and measured. It was a technique she'd learned years ago, training in Earth's high-altitude mountains where the air was thin and every breath mattered. The principle was the same: control what you could control. 5 steps. 10 steps. 20 steps. The pillar in the center of the room grew closer. Around her, the air shimmered with the distortion of warped space. Other species had tried to rush through this chamber, using speed to minimize exposure. They had all failed. Sarah understood why now. Speed required energy, and energy required oxygen, and in this crushing gravity, oxygen was precious. She moved like a persistence hunter, the ancient instinct of her species rising to the surface. Slow and steady. Never stopping. Always moving forward. 30 minutes passed. Sarah reached the pillar and placed her hand on the glowing crystal. The gravity field immediately collapsed, and she nearly fell as her body suddenly weighed normal again. The crystal pulsed once, and a door opened on the far side of the chamber. Extraordinary, Administrator Quinn breathed. She actually made it through. Sarah allowed herself 30 seconds to rest, gulping air and letting her heart rate settle. Then she stood and walked toward the open door. The next chamber was smaller, perhaps 20 meters square. As Sarah entered, she felt the temperature immediately. It was comfortable, almost pleasant. Too pleasant. Temperature readings are normal, reported one of the technicians. Approximately galactic standard for most species. Then the room changed. The temperature plummeted in seconds, dropping so fast that frost formed on Sarah's suit. Her breath came out in great white clouds. The suit's basic heating struggled to compensate. -40 degrees. Krell shouted. This is the temperature chamber we detected. It cycles between extremes every 3 minutes. Sarah felt the cold seeping through her suit, attacking her exposed hands and face. Her fingers began to tingle, the first warning sign of frostbite. But something else was happening too. Her body was responding, blood vessels constricting to preserve heat in her core, metabolism ramping up to generate warmth. She started moving, walking quickly in a circle, generating heat through motion. Her muscles burned, but that burn was life. That burn was survival. 2 minutes into the freeze cycle, the temperature reversed. The change was violent and sudden. Within 30 seconds, the room became an oven. The temperature shot up past boiling, heat radiating from the walls themselves. Sarah's suit began to fail. Warning lights flashed as the basic cooling system overloaded. She felt sweat breaking out across her entire body, beating on her forehead and running down her back. 120 degrees. Dr. Plix gasped. The Kelthian expedition registered 105 before their biology broke down. They literally cooked from the inside. But Sarah was already adapting. Her body began producing sweat in massive quantities, coating her skin in a layer of moisture. As it evaporated, it pulled heat away from her body. It was inefficient and uncomfortable, but it worked. She pulled off her gloves, knowing the suit was no longer helping. Her hands immediately began to sweat, helping to regulate her temperature. The scientists watching from their safe observation deck were horrified to see her expose herself, but Sarah knew her biology better than they did. The temperature cycled again. Cold. Then hot. Then cold. Each cycle was torture, her body swinging between extremes that would kill most species instantly. But humans had evolved on a planet with wild temperature swings. Deserts that baked during the day and froze at night. Tropical zones that steamed and then flooded. Arctic regions where survival itself was a daily challenge. Sarah's body was built for this. Her sweat glands could produce moisture in quantities that seemed impossible to the watching aliens. Her shivering response could generate heat when needed. Her blood vessels could constrict or dilate to control heat loss or retention. She's been in there for 23 minutes, Krell said quietly. Through 7 complete cycles. The longest any previous expedition lasted was 4 minutes. Sarah found the pattern. 3 minutes of cold, 3 minutes of heat, with a 5-second transition between them. She timed her movements to the cycles, staying active during the cold to generate warmth, staying still during the heat to minimize internal temperature rise. On the 30-minute mark, a door opened on the far wall. Sarah stumbled through it, her body exhausted but functioning. She found herself in a small transition chamber with normal temperature and breathable air. A bench had been built into one wall, almost like the architects had expected survivors to need rest. Sarah sat down heavily, her hands shaking from fatigue. Sweat soaked her undersuit, and her hair was plastered to her head. But she was alive. Impossible, Dr. Plix kept repeating. This is impossible. Not impossible, Sarah said between gasps for air. Just human. She looked at the next door ahead of her. Through her suit sensors, she could detect chemical traces beyond it. The toxin chamber most likely. The place where the architects had released biological and chemical weapons designed to kill anything living. Sarah stood up, her legs still shaky but growing stronger. She had survived crushing gravity. She had survived temperature extremes that would boil or freeze most known species. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way her ancestors had faced every challenge Earth threw at them. By refusing to quit. By adapting. By surviving. She walked toward the next door and it opened before her. The door sealed behind Sarah with a hiss that echoed through the chamber. She found herself in a long corridor, perhaps 50 meters from end to end. The walls glowed with a sickly green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, and it carried a sharp chemical smell that made her nose wrinkle. Atmospheric analysis incoming, Krell reported, his voice tight with concern. Sarah, the air in that corridor contains 17 different toxic compounds. 3 of them are known to be lethal to carbon-based life at even trace levels. You need to activate your suit's oxygen supply immediately. Sarah reached for the emergency oxygen mask on her belt but paused. Her suit had only 2 hours of oxygen stored. If she used it now and there were more chambers ahead, she might run out when she needed it most. She studied the corridor ahead, watching the green mist that swirled near the floor. How lethal? She asked. The Ven expedition died in 43 seconds, Dr. Plix answered. Their cellular walls dissolved. It was not a pleasant death. Sarah made a decision. She took 3 deep breaths, filling her lungs completely, and then sealed her lips shut. She started walking quickly down the corridor, holding her breath. What is she doing? Administrator Quinn's colors flashed red with alarm. She's not using the oxygen supply. Sarah moved with purpose, her eyes fixed on the door at the far end. Her lungs began to burn after 30 seconds, but she kept moving. 45 seconds. 1 minute. Her vision started to darken at the edges, her body screaming for air. The scientists watched in amazement as their instruments tracked her progress. 60 seconds. 70 seconds. Species across the galaxy had different oxygen requirements, but most could barely manage 30 seconds without air before brain damage began. Her blood oxygen saturation is still at 82%, Krell muttered, checking his readings twice to confirm. How is that possible? Sarah reached the far door at 93 seconds and slapped the opening mechanism. It slid open and she stumbled through, finally releasing her held breath in a great gasp. She bent over, hands on her knees, pulling in clean air in desperate gulps. Human lungs have larger capacity than you estimated, she managed between breaths. And we're good at holding our breath. Some humans can go 5 minutes or more with training. She had bought herself time and conserved her oxygen supply. But as she straightened up and looked at the next chamber, she realized she might need every second of that oxygen for what came next. The room before her was filled with a yellow fog so thick she could barely see 3 meters ahead. Her suit sensors went crazy, detecting radiation levels that made the monitoring team gasp in horror. That's gamma radiation, Krell said, his voice almost a whisper. Enough to sterilize every piece of equipment we sent in. It breaks down DNA at the molecular level. Sarah, there is no way through that room. Even with your suit, the exposure would be fatal within minutes. Sarah checked her oxygen supply again, then checked the radiation readings. The architects had created a chamber that would destroy genetic material itself, the very blueprint of life. No armor could stop it. No shield could block it. It would pour through any protection and tear apart the delicate codes that made living things function. How long did the Kelthians survive in there? Sarah asked. They didn't enter, Administrator Quinn replied. Their drones measured the radiation and they wisely turned back. They knew it was impossible. Sarah looked at the thick yellow fog. Somewhere on the other side was another door, another chamber, and possibly answers to why the architects had built this nightmare. She thought about Earth, about the radiation that bombarded her planet from the sun, from space, from the rocks beneath their feet. Humans lived with radiation every day. They had evolved mechanisms to handle it. I'm going in, she said. Sarah, no. Dr. Plix pleaded. This isn't like the other chambers. This will kill you at the cellular level. There's no adapting to this. But Sarah was already moving. She activated her oxygen supply and stepped into the yellow fog. Immediately, her suit's radiation alarm began screaming. The numbers on her display climbed to levels that should have been instantly fatal. On the observation deck, the scientists watched her vital signs with morbid fascination. They expected to see her cellular structures begin to break down, her organs to fail, her brain activity to cease. Instead, something else happened. Her cells are repairing themselves, Krell said in disbelief. I'm detecting massive DNA repair activity. Her body is fixing the damage as fast as the radiation causes it. Sarah walked through the fog, feeling a strange warmth spreading through her body. It wasn't painful exactly, more like a deep tingling in her bones. She knew what was happening. Radiation was tearing apart her DNA, and her cells were working overtime to repair the breaks. Every human had this mechanism, a legacy from billions of years of evolution under a sun that constantly bombarded Earth with radiation. But her repair systems were working faster than the scientists thought possible. The damage was severe, yes, but not faster than her body could handle. She was in a race against time, her cellular machinery fighting to keep her alive with every step. 20 meters into the chamber, Sarah's nose began to bleed. She tasted copper in her mouth. These were signs of radiation sickness, the first warnings that her body was reaching its limits. But the door was ahead, visible now through the thinning fog. 30 meters. Her hands started to shake. The radiation was accumulating, building up faster than her repair mechanisms could fully compensate. She had minutes at most before the damage became permanent. 40 meters. The door was close now, just a few more steps. Sarah's vision blurred and she felt her legs weaken. But she pushed forward, driven by the same stubborn persistence that had carried her ancestors across continents and through ice ages. She hit the door's opening mechanism and fell through as it opened. The door sealed behind her, cutting off the radiation. Sarah collapsed on the floor, gasping, bleeding from her nose and ears. Her body was damaged but not destroyed. Already, her repair mechanisms were working on the accumulated damage, fixing breaks in her DNA, cleaning up cellular debris. She survived, Administrator Quen said, his form pulsing with colors that indicated emotions his species had no words for. She walked through enough radiation to sterilize a spacecraft and she survived. Sarah lay on the floor for 5 full minutes, letting her body recover. When she finally sat up, she wiped the blood from her face and checked her vital signs. Elevated heart rate. High levels of stress hormones. Significant cellular damage. But all within survivable limits. Humans evolved on a planet bathed in radiation, she said quietly. From the sun, from the ground, from space. We built mechanisms to handle it. Not perfectly, but enough. She looked ahead at the next door and wondered what other horrors the architects had prepared. But she had made it this far. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else. Sarah stood in a small transition chamber, checking her suit's remaining power and oxygen levels. Both were running low, but she had enough for perhaps another hour. Maybe 2 if she was careful. The next door waited ahead, but unlike the others, this one was different. It was completely black, absorbing all light that touched it. We're detecting something strange beyond that door, Krell said, his voice uncertain. No radiation, no toxins, no temperature extremes. Just emptiness. Emptiness? Sarah asked. The Fenari expedition called it the Silent Room, Administrator Quen explained. They were a telepathic species, constantly connected to each other's minds. When their team entered, they lost all contact within seconds. We recovered their bodies 3 days later. They had clawed their own eyes out. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Physical challenges she could handle. Her body was built for punishment, shaped by Earth's harsh conditions. But psychological torture was different. That attacked the mind itself. I'm going in, she said, because there was no other choice. Turning back now would mean everything she'd endured was for nothing. The door opened silently. Beyond it lay absolute darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, but the complete absence of light, as if the chamber beyond swallowed illumination itself. Sarah stepped through and the door sealed behind her. Silence hit her like a physical force. Not just quiet, but the total absence of sound. Her suit stopped humming. Her breathing made no noise. Her heartbeat, usually a constant companion, vanished from her awareness. She tried to speak, to say something, anything, but no sound emerged. Sarah waved her hand in front of her face and saw nothing. The darkness was complete. She stamped her foot and felt the impact but heard nothing. She was cut off from every sense except touch and the dim awareness of her own body. Sarah? Krell's voice was gone. The communication implant in her head was silent. She was alone in a way that no human was meant to be alone. On the observation deck, the scientists watched their monitors with growing concern. Sarah's vital signs were still transmitting, but all other data had ceased. They couldn't see what she saw, couldn't hear what she heard. They could only watch the numbers that represented her heartbeat and breathing. Her heart rate is elevating, Dr. Plix observed. Stress hormones are increasing. Inside the chamber, Sarah fought against rising panic. Her ancestors had feared the dark for good reason. Predators hunted at night. Danger lurked in shadows. The human brain was wired to find patterns, to see faces and shapes, to make sense of sensory input. Without any input at all, her mind began to create its own. She saw flashes of light that weren't there. Heard whispers in the silence. Felt touches on her skin where nothing existed. Her brain was trying to fill the void and the results were terrifying. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly. She counted her breaths, using the rhythm to anchor herself. 1 breath in. Hold. 1 breath out. Hold. It was something concrete, something real in the emptiness. She began to walk forward, hands outstretched, feeling for walls or obstacles. Time lost meaning in the darkness. Had she been walking for minutes or hours? She couldn't tell. But she kept moving, kept counting breaths, kept her mind focused on simple tasks. After what felt like an eternity, her hand touched a wall. Then she found a corner. She began mapping the room in her mind, using touch to build a mental picture. It was perhaps 10 meters square. She searched methodically, feeling every centimeter, until she found it. A small panel on one wall that was slightly warmer than the surrounding surface. She pressed it and light exploded back into existence. Sound returned. Sarah gasped, nearly crying with relief as her senses came back online. Sarah. Krell's voice was frantic. Are you there? You've been silent for 47 minutes. I'm here, Sarah managed, her voice shaky. I'm okay. But she wasn't okay. Not yet. Another door had appeared, and beyond it, Sarah could hear something. A sound that made her skin crawl, a frequency that seemed to vibrate in her bones. She stepped through the door and immediately understood why the Kelthians had gone mad. The chamber was filled with sound, but not normal sound. It was a frequency specifically designed to trigger fear responses. Sarah's body reacted instantly. Her heart raced. Her hands shook. Adrenaline flooded her system. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to escape. The walls were covered in images, horrifying scenes that shifted and changed. They showed death, destruction, and nightmare visions pulled from some alien mind. But to Sarah they looked strange and disconnected. These weren't human fears. They were designed for species with different psychology, different evolutionary backgrounds. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her breathing again. The fear was real, yes, but it was also artificial. The architects were using sound and light to hack into primitive brain structures, triggering panic responses directly. But knowing that helped. Understanding the mechanism gave her power over it. She walked forward with her eyes closed, trusting her other senses, letting the fear wash over her without fighting it. Humans had lived with fear forever. Fear of predators, fear of starvation, fear of the dark. They had learned to function despite fear, to make decisions even when terrified. The sound grew louder, more intense, but Sarah kept walking. Her body wanted to freeze, to curl up and hide, but she forced her legs to move. One step. Another step. Keep moving. Keep surviving. Finally the sound cut off. Sarah opened her eyes and found herself in the final chamber of this section. It was a maze, but not a normal maze. The walls were transparent and seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Symbols covered every surface, mathematical equations and logical puzzles that rearranged themselves constantly. This is the adaptation maze, Administrator Quinn explained, relief evident in his voice now that communication was restored. It studies how you solve problems and then changes to counter your strategies. The Rethian expedition, known for their logical minds, spent 6 hours trying to solve it before they gave up. Sarah looked at the shifting walls and the changing symbols. She understood the trap. A species that relied purely on logic would get caught in an endless loop, trying to find the pattern while the maze adapted to prevent pattern recognition. But humans didn't rely only on logic. They used intuition, emotion, and sometimes just dumb luck. Sarah stopped trying to solve the maze intellectually. Instead, she walked forward, turning left or right based on feeling rather than reason. When the maze shifted to counter her strategy, she simply changed strategies, using no consistent pattern at all. She backtracked when needed, took random turns, sometimes walked in circles on purpose. The maze couldn't adapt to randomness because randomness had no pattern to counter. After 20 minutes of what looked like aimless wandering, Sarah walked through the exit. The scientists were silent, processing what they had witnessed. A human had survived sensory deprivation, fear induction, and an adaptive intelligence test. She had done it not through superior technology or advanced evolution, but through sheer stubborn persistence and mental flexibility. I don't understand, Dr. Plick said quietly. Everything we know about survival requirements suggests this should have been impossible. Sarah smiled as she approached the final door, the one that would lead to the center of the gauntlet. Maybe you need to rethink what you know about survival, she said. The final door opened into a chamber unlike anything Sarah had seen before. It was vast, easily 100 meters across, with a domed ceiling that displayed what looked like stars. But these weren't random stars. They were arranged in patterns, constellations that shifted and moved, telling a story in light. In the center of the room stood a crystalline structure, roughly 3 meters tall and pulsing with soft blue light. As Sarah approached, the crystal began to glow brighter, responding to her presence. Symbols appeared in the air around it, floating like holographic ghosts. Sarah, we're receiving massive data transmissions, Krell said, his voice filled with excitement. The structure is broadcasting information on thousands of channels. It's like it's been waiting for someone to arrive. Sarah reached out and touched the crystal. The moment her fingers made contact, images flooded her mind. Not painful but overwhelming. She saw a civilization ancient and advanced, living on worlds that made paradise planets look harsh by comparison. The architects, as the galaxy had named them, called themselves the Sereneth. They had evolved on a world of perfect climate, gentle gravity, and abundant resources. For millions of years, they had thrived, building a civilization that spanned dozens of star systems. They had eliminated disease, aging, and suffering. They had created a utopia. Sarah saw their cities, beautiful beyond description, with towers that reached the clouds and gardens that stretched for thousands of kilometers. She saw the Sereneth themselves, delicate beings of grace and intelligence, living lives of art, philosophy, and peaceful exploration. But then the images changed. Sarah saw a star, one of the Sereneth's suns, beginning to die. Not in billions of years as expected, but now, corrupted by some cosmic anomaly that science couldn't explain. The star expanded, becoming unstable, threatening to destroy everything in its path. The Sereneth tried to adapt. They built shelters, created new technologies, attempted to evacuate their populations. But they discovered something terrible. After millions of years of comfortable existence, they had lost the ability to survive hardship. Their bodies were too fragile for the stress of rapid evacuation. Their minds couldn't handle the fear and uncertainty. Their civilization, built on perfection, crumbled when faced with chaos. Sarah saw the desperate final days. The Sereneth building the gauntlet, not as a test of worthiness but as a warning. They wanted to preserve their knowledge for any species strong enough to claim it. But more than that, they wanted to send a message. The images shifted again, and Sarah found herself looking at data, pure information flowing into her mind. Star charts, scientific discoveries, philosophical treatises, the accumulated knowledge of a civilization millions of years old. But underneath it all was a simple message, repeated in every language the Sereneth had ever learned. Comfort breeds weakness. Weakness breeds extinction. May the survivors learn from our failure. Sarah pulled her hand back from the crystal, gasping. The scientists watching from their observation deck had seen none of this, only Sarah standing motionless for several minutes, her vital signs spiking with neural activity. "What did you see?" Administrator Quen asked quietly. Sarah looked around the chamber, seeing it with new understanding. The gravity that would crush fragile bones. The temperatures that would kill those adapted only to comfort. The toxins that would destroy those without robust immune systems. The psychological trials that would break those who had never known true hardship. It wasn't a test, Sarah said slowly. It was a filter. The Sereneth built this to find species capable of survival. They died because they were too perfect, too adapted to easy living. When disaster came, they had nothing left to fight with. She walked around the crystal, studying the star charts projected in the air. They showed the current galaxy, marked with hundreds of civilizations. Most of them lived on garden worlds, comfortable planets with gentle conditions. Very few came from places like Earth. "They're warning us," Sarah continued. "All of you, all the species in the galaxy living your comfortable lives on your perfect worlds. You're walking the same path the Sereneth walked. And when the next cosmic disaster comes, you won't be ready." Dr. Plix's skin color changed to a pale, frightened hue. "You're saying we're too weak to survive?" "I'm saying the Sereneth thought they were too weak," Sarah replied. "And they were right. They gave themselves every advantage, every comfort, every protection. And in doing so they lost the one thing that matters most, the ability to adapt to change." Krell's mandibles clicked nervously. "But humans, you come from a Class 12 death world. You evolved with constant danger, harsh conditions, and limited resources. You're saying that made you stronger?" "Not stronger," Sarah corrected. "More adaptable. Earth tried to kill us every single day. Predators, diseases, weather, starvation, everything. We survived because we had to. We evolved redundant systems, robust repair mechanisms, and minds that could solve problems under extreme stress." She touched the crystal again, and this time she accessed specific files. Information about cosmic threats, patterns the Sereneth had detected in their final years. Warning signs of instabilities that could affect any star system, any planet, at any time. "The Sereneth left this knowledge for whoever could reach it," Sarah said. "But they also left a warning. The galaxy is not a safe place. It never was. The comfortable civilizations out there are living on borrowed time just like the Sereneth did." Administrator Quen's colors shifted through a rainbow of emotions. "What do you propose we do with this information?" Sarah smiled, though there was no humor in it. You start preparing. You study what made humans and other Deathworld species survive. You introduce controlled challenges into your societies. You stop trying to make everything perfect and safe. Because when the next disaster comes, and it will come, the species that survive won't be the strongest or the smartest. They'll be the most adaptable. She began downloading the Sereneth database into her suit's storage systems. Thousands of years of knowledge, preserved in crystal and light, now being copied for the galaxy to study. It would take decades to translate it all, to understand everything the Sereneth had learned. But the most important lesson was already clear. The Sereneth had built a paradise and it had killed them. They had eliminated every challenge, every hardship, every source of stress. And when real danger appeared, they had no tools left to fight with. The primitive Deathworlders, Sarah said quietly, using the term mini-species applied to humans. That's what you call us. You think we're savage because we come from harsh worlds. But maybe we're not primitive. Maybe we're just prepared. She turned away from the crystal and walked back toward the exit. Behind her, the chamber began to power down, its message delivered, its purpose fulfilled. The gauntlet would remain, waiting for the next species brave enough or desperate enough to enter its depths. On the observation deck, the scientists watched Sarah emerge from the final chamber. She was exhausted, injured, and pushed to her absolute limits. But she was alive. She had survived where 47 other species had failed. Prepare a full report, Administrator Quinn said quietly. The Council needs to hear this. All of it. Dr. Plix looked at her monitoring displays, at the data they had collected from Sarah's journey. They won't want to believe it. The idea that comfort makes us weak, that we need hardship to survive, it goes against everything modern civilization stands for. Then maybe modern civilization needs to change, Krell said. Before it's too late. Sarah climbed back aboard the transport shuttle, every muscle in her body screaming with fatigue. She had walked through hell and emerged with knowledge that could change the galaxy. But as she looked back at the gauntlet, at the ancient warning built by a dead civilization, she wondered if anyone would listen. The comfortable rarely chose to make life harder. But the Sereneth had been comfortable too. And now they were extinct, leaving only their warning behind. Sarah hoped the galaxy would prove smarter than its predecessors. But hope, she knew, was not a survival strategy. Only adaptation was. Only the willingness to face hardship and emerge stronger. Only the qualities that made Deathworlders survive.